Okay, folks, well, you may well have been poking around a second-hand bookshop and you suddenly found a moth-eaten Bible somewhere. And you say to yourself, or to whoever you're going in with, hey, do you know, people used to read this stuff years ago. They used to even believe it. And that's very much what our society says today. But the Bible is far and away the world's best seller. It really is. And there are many people in the world who would give their right arm to get a copy of the Bible. They've never been allowed to even read it. And yet, in England, there are loads of people who've got actually no idea of what the Bible is about. So I think the first thing to notice is this, that the Bible is not a single book, it's a library. It contains 66 books, written over a period of more than 1,000 years in 3 languages by 40 or so different authors. And different is the key word. Some were shepherds, some were kings, some were poets, some were historians, some were prophets, some were visionaries, some were mystics, some were fishermen. Incredible variety. And you know, if you've got a bunch of those people together in this room here, and you ask them, what is your view of God? What's your view of man? What's your view of how life ought to be lived? What's your view of destiny? Then you'd get almost as many answers as you got questions. But the really astonishing thing about the Bible, a thing that convinces me that it's a very special book, is that you find a common understanding, a unified teaching running right through it. And that's why you can call it one book, a Bible, and not just 66 disparate presentations. Just have a look at some of these things. First of all, you've got a united view of God. Always you find the same picture, that God is the author of life. He's the only proper object of worship. He's personal, and yet, of course, he's beyond personality. He is the source of morality, and he's perfectly upright and cares passionately about justice. And he's full of love towards people in the world that he has made. You get that view all across the Bible, Old Testament and New. And it's the same view as well of human nature. You get a common understanding there. According to the Bible, we're not gods, as some New Agers claim. We're not just sophisticated animals, as some biologists claim. We're not just chemical constructs in motion, as some behaviorists claim. We're neither naked apes nor little angels, but the Bible insists that we are in some sense made in God's likeness, which includes the ability to speak and to pray and to reflect and to know the difference between right and wrong. God intended us, so this book tells us, to live harmoniously in families and to enjoy his company. But almost every page of the Bible reflects the truth that all down the ages, human beings have rejected that ideal. We've gone our own way, not God's way. And the chaos in human affairs springs primarily, this book tells us, from our attitude of rejection to God. Leave the architect out of the picture and there's a shambles on the building site. It's not just the times that are out of joint, but that we are out of joint. Now that's a very radical view of human nature. And it's very unfashionable amongst the chattering classes. But the Sunday papers vindicate it every week. That's what human beings are like. And that's the view that the Bible writers are absolutely unanimous about. One view of God, one view of humankind. There's a few seats over here if you prefer more comfortable seats for your behind. come along. We don't mind in the least people drifting in at this time. We're talking about the remarkable thing about the Bible is that although it's been written over 1,000 years, and although it's got over 40 different authors, there's a complete unanimity in the picture it gives of God and of human beings, and also the picture it gives of rescue for human beings, restoration, salvation. Think of somebody who is in a burning house. What do they need? They need to be saved. Think of somebody who is drowning. They've gone down twice. They need to be saved before they go down the third time. And it's just a picture, isn't it, of mortal danger. And that's how the Bible sees the human situation. We've rebelled against God, and that brings a sort of deadness from him, a cut-offness from him. And that is like a mortal disease. It's very serious. God might well have washed his hands of us, as D.H. Lawrence advised him to. But no, God cares about us so much that he determined to do something absolutely radical, to rescue us from the guilt that our actions bring and the grip in which our failures imprison us. And in a word, the great theme of the Bible, you could put it in 4 words, God to the rescue. That's what the Bible is about, and actually that's what the name Jesus means. It means God to the rescue. He was deliberately called that. The heart of the message of the Bible is that God came in human flesh in the person of Jesus. And he lived a perfect life, and he offered up that life voluntarily on the cross to sort of deal with the imperfection that the rest of us have. An incredibly costly way of removing our guilt so that we could stand tall and forgiven, and of breaking our chains and seeking to carve out a way that would bring us back into relationship with God, the God we've thumbed our noses at. And this isn't a solitary thing. It's not the journey of the alone to the alone. It involves believers in a new community, the Christian community or the Christian church, people who love one another, at least they do on a good day, and they seek to enhance and advance the claims of God in this world. So you've got a united view of man, of God, and of rescue. And the other thing is, there's a united view in the Bible writers about the future. As if it wasn't enough to think about this amazing rescue that God offers us, he tells us that at the end of the day, there is a future awaiting those who trust him. He's not prepared to scrap us when we get old and die. He offers us welcome in his home in heaven. And our destiny is not to go out like a light, not to be constantly recycled to a sort of endless round of reincarnation, but to know and to enjoy forever the God who loves us, the God who gave himself for us, and to do so not just in a solitary way, but in the company of others who look to him for rescue and are so grateful to him for it. It's a brilliant vision, isn't it? That's what the kernel of the Bible is about. Now, it would be amazing if one person had come up with such astonishing insights. But when 40 or so authors of the Bible agree in this view of God and man and evil and restoration and the new community and human destiny, then it's simply staggering. No wonder the Bible writers claim, and Christians have always believed, that God himself gave these insights. They could never have come up with an identical answer on all these issues by themselves. But because Jesus Christ is the heart of the Bible's message, and most skepticism today focuses upon Jesus and the gospel story, Let me ask and answer a few questions about that. Then I'll be only too glad at the end to try and respond to any questions you come up with, which you can either text in, or we'll have some open questions from the floor when we get there. Question number one: when were these Gospels written? There is an amazing amount of rubbish talked about this. They were not written hundreds of years after the event. They were all written within the lifetime of his first followers. They were written by people who were very close to the action. All of those 4 Gospels are quoted by Clement of Rome, who was a writer writing in the 90s of the first centuries. I'm not selling you soft soap. This view is uncontroversial amongst anybody who knows anything about it. New Testament scholars are agreed on it. The Gospels are written early. Second question: what are the sort of dates of our earliest manuscripts? Because it's one thing to have them written in the first century, but when did we get the first manuscript? When did we get the first attestation of it? Normally, with ancient documents, there are many centuries between when the guy wrote and when our first manuscript survives. In the case of Thucydides, that gap is 800 years. With Julius Caesar, it's 900 years. With Tacitus, it's about 750 years. This is normal, totally normal, and it doesn't faze any classical scholars at all. What's more, not only is there a gap that they're quite used to between the autographed copy and the first surviving manuscript, but usually there's only 2 or 3 manuscripts of these authors surviving from the early written stage. But with the Gospels, it's entirely different. We have manuscripts of our 4 Gospels written within 100 years of their compilation. There is no ancient document where the gap between the writer and the first surviving manuscript is so short, and where the attestation is so broad because it comes from all over the ancient world. We've got not 2 or 3 early manuscripts of the Gospels. We've got over 5,000 Greek manuscripts and vast numbers of manuscripts written in Syriac and Latin and Coptic and Georgian and Armenian and so on. And this shows the authenticity of the text. It proves that nobody could have monkeyed around with the text and put bits in here and taken bits out there, because if they'd done it in one language, you could see from the other languages that that had been done. No, the text is rock solid. We have it as it was written. Question number 3. What about the content of the Gospels? You see, it's not the text of the New Testament that troubles most people who don't believe, but it's the content, it's what it's all about. Now, the Gospels are all unambiguous in claiming that Almighty God showed himself in human form. And if you want to know what God is like, you take a long, long look at Jesus. No other religion has ever made so outrageous a claim. Is it credible? Well, there are many indications that it is. Let me just outline 2 or 3 of them for you. There is first the influence of Jesus across the world and down the centuries. It is incomparable. And not only is it by far the biggest faith that the world has ever seen, comprising about 1/3 of humankind today, but it has led his followers to pioneer medicine and universities and science and humanitarian concerns of all kinds. Art and culture as well you could throw in. Enormous influence. Secondly, there's the teaching of Jesus. It is the greatest teaching that has ever been offered to mankind. For instance, if people really did love their enemies and do good to those that hated them, the current chaos in the Middle East would be solved overnight. Then there's the character of Jesus. You have a look at the character of Jesus as we have it in these four Gospels. It's absolutely perfect. There's no virtue that he doesn't have, and there's no vices that he does have. His character is a moral miracle. And talking of miracles, you do find those in the Gospels. They're always for the good of other people. They're always to disclose in a little cameo what God is really like. And they are attested by non-Christian sources as well as Christian ones. And indeed, if God really did come in human form, you'd expect just one or two things to be just slightly different, wouldn't you, if he did so? And then there's the prophecies. There's loads of prophecies in the Bible, most of them uttered between 500 and 800 years before Jesus. And they all converge in Jesus. It's absolutely astonishing. Nowhere in history is there anyone where predictions made 600-800 years beforehand have been precisely fulfilled in a person's life. And many of them concern his birth and his death. And if you were out to try and fix prophecies, the two most tricky areas to fix would be your birth and your death. And then there's his claims. This humble carpenter claimed to accept worship, to forgive sins, to be the light of the world, to be the final judge of all people. And this person, it's lunacy. It's absolute lunacy, unless it's true. And yet Jesus doesn't come across as a lunatic, does he? He comes across as the most balanced and wise and winsome person that there's ever been. And then there's, of course, his death. His death is the most famous in history. He claimed that it was to ransom a world that was captured by alien forces of bad stuff. He wanted to rescue us from the consequences of our sin and folly. Might he not just have been right? And the crowning thing which persuaded people then, and has persuaded multi-millions since, is his resurrection. It's called the best attested fact in ancient history. I'm going to rehearse the evidence on 2 mornings, not tomorrow, but the morning after. Do come back if you would like to look at the evidence for the resurrection, because it's very, very powerful. So you see, these things coming together gradually persuaded the followers of Jesus that he did indeed bring God into our world, to show us what God is like, and to demonstrate also as a human being what human life at its best should aim to be like. Don't think it was easy for the first followers of Jesus to accept that he brought God into the scene. It was incredibly different. Every man jack of them was a Jew. And in their background, the one thing you could not have was any image of God, and certainly nobody claiming to bring God into the midst. And yet Jesus did. These Jews, to a man, were as monotheistic as any Muslim today. It was the hardest soil in the whole world to sow the Christian conviction of the divinity of Jesus, and for that to take root. And yet it did take root, and it has spread to every nation in the world. So there, I'm due to stop now at 22, so that we've got time to discuss these things. Now, in just a moment, the chair is going to come forward, but the chair can stay seated for a second or two. You know, folks, the real challenge that we face is not the reliability of the Bible, which has been demonstrated again and again and again over the centuries. The real challenge is how we respond to the central figure that the Bible is on about, Jesus. And may I just suggest to you that while you're here at university, this is the best time in your life to investigate it. You are free from the pressures of home and all the cultural background and the baggage you may have inherited there. You are your own person now to do your own thing. And this is the moment to explore the big questions of life. When you've got a mortgage and a spouse and 4 kids and hospital bills and an ulcer, it's a little bit late. And you won't have time to do it. Now is the time to really look into it. And when you go out of here, you'll find some little books. They are called Uncover. It is the Gospel of John, written in a modern language and with 6 very shrewd, short questionnaire type, really, sort of interviews at the back to have a look, 4 cameo pictures of Jesus to see what he's like, for you to make up your own mind. And you can do that on your own, or you can do it with a Christian friend over a coffee. That is happening in many, many countries of the world. It's enormously widespread, this Uncover thing. But what I would urge you to do is not to brush this under the carpet. This is the time in your life to really look into it. And you're going to have an opportunity. You've got a response form in front of you, which my colleague is going to tell you how to fill in. I've been forbidden to say how you should do it. But anyhow, you do that when you get there. But there may be some of you who have been sort of a church or youth club before you came here. But you haven't joined in with Christian things in the university here. You frankly weren't really confident that the Bible story is reliable. And if you're rethinking that after today, perhaps, you could come and ask me for a copy of this before you go. It's a little booklet that's written very simply. I've written it actually to try and answer the question. If I put my trust in Jesus Christ, will he come into my life and make a difference? If that's your question, do come and ask me for one of these. I shall be delighted to give it to you. And now, Anna, back to you.